Mercury retrograde. It's a term you've probably heard a lot, and we're actually in the middle of one right now. And it gets blamed for everything, right? From contracts falling through to the computer blowing up, messages not being received, right? Things that fall apart in our communication and even in our consciousness, right? I've been working a lot with Mercury retrogrades, so I'm not really having a lot of the communication things fall apart the way that they used to before. But still, for me, I've been noticing I want stillness right now, right? I mean, it's my difficulty today has been actually to get on and make this recording because I'm just like, no, let's just be calm. Let's just be still. And that's really one of the ways to work with Mercury retrograde, which is why I wanted to create this video, is to talk to people about part of the reason why Mercury retrogrades happen and how to alleviate the stress that happens with it. And in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to do some advanced astrology work, right? We're going to look into the Western tradition and what Mercury rules over. We'll look into the Eastern tradition and see what the West is really missing here. And then we'll work on how to apply what we've learned through that into our own lives. Because you can work with Mercury retrogrades and you can do it really well. I might be stumbling over my words here with some Mercury backwardness. But when we do the work with Mercury retrogrades, it makes everything flow a lot easier. And it's a natural way of working with the cycles in life that really empowers us. So first, let's dive into Mercury in the Western tradition. And bear with me as things glitch, right? Because that's part of the retrograde. And being able to really just laugh at that and see that is going to be one of the main lessons about a Mercury retrograde. So what I wanted to point out here with the Western tradition is that typically this is the modern way of doing it when we have some of the modern planets like Neptune and Pluto here. But the signs are ruled by certain planets, right? Mercury rules Gemini and rules Virgo. And traditionally, every one of the planets ruled two signs, right? So Jupiter rules Pisces and Sagittarius. Saturn rules Aquarius and Capricorn. So Aquarius and Capricorn. Jupiter rules Pisces and Sagittarius. Mars rules Aries and Scorpio. Venus rules Taurus and Libra. Mercury rules Gemini and Virgo. And then the sun and moon each rule one planet, or one sign. And each planet also is exalted in a certain sign. So Venus, while she rules over Taurus and Libra, she's exalted in Pisces. The sun is exalted in Aries. And there's mathematical reasons for some of this, and there's also very real symbolic reasons, right? So the sun is exalted in Aries, which is the time of the season in the northern hemisphere when the sun starts to take up more time and space, right? Daylight is Aries starts with the spring equinox, and from that point on, it's getting lighter and lighter and brighter, right, until the summer solstice. So from that time that Aries initiates until the summer solstice, you have an abundance of light, and it's growing and it's strengthening. So the sun is exalted there. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, which is a great sign for that expansion property of Jupiter and a cardinal sign with Cancer. And it's fantastic because Jupiter really talks and touches on our relationship to spirit a lot of time, right? And what better way to relate to spirit than this motherly figure that loves you, right? And has that Cancer energy. Mars is exalted in Capricorn, which is he becomes the wise. He goes from the new recruit Aries with just a ton of energy but a lot of naivety from experience to the in the trenches Scorpio, coming up against opposition and figuring out how to overcome it, right? How to gain power over the obstacles that are coming up for it, to Capricorn, where he's a vet, he's wise, he's had those experiences, he knows what to do. And so each of these planets and each of and the sun and the moon, they each have exaltations where they just flow easier. And they tend to be, for every single one of them, they tend to be somewhere else in the chart, right? The moon is exalted in Taurus, which allows that very emotional, intuitional aspect of life to really be embodied in Taurus. But Saturn is embodied in Libra, which is this great space of balance, right? What better way to really exalt the energy of Saturn and that relationship to reaping what you sow than in this very balanced sign? The one planet that does not have an exaltation outside of the signs that it already rules is Mercury. Right? Mercury rules over Gemini and rules over Virgo, and it's said to be exalted in Virgo. Now, this is weird, right? Because it's the only planet that has that. Gemini is a air sign, which is all about like thought and the cerebral spaces. Virgo is an earth sign, which is very practical. Both of them are mutable signs, so they're very adaptable. But it's a very shallow interpretation of Hermes, right? Or of Mercury and Hermes, because in ancient tradition, Mercury and Hermes originate as the god of boundaries, and by originating as gods of boundaries, they then become the god of that crosses boundaries, right? Which is how they become associated with language, which crosses the boundary of me to you and meaning and understanding from my mind to your mind. They're associated with travel and with roads and crossing boundaries of location. They're associated as a psychopomp, right? As Hermes and Mercury led the dead to the underworld, and they're the messenger of the gods. So they take our prayers up to the gods. So they connect the heavens and the earth and the underworld beneath. You don't see that connotation, that underworld messenger or that spiritual messenger, as much in Gemini or Virgo. They're, as you've heard me talk about, a Virgo who gets in touch with its sacred aspect does do service to the divine, right? Finds a way to really let the divine flow into each action that they have in ritual. And Gemini can definitely be a voice for the divine, but they're not as easily connected to those two spaces, right? The more intuitive elements tend to be fire and water, right? Fire from just kind of being in tune and being like, this is what needs to happen, and water from really sensing out and feeling spaces. So the ancients had this image of Hermes and Mercury, which was a lot more embodied than what we see here in astrology. And part of this thought process that I've been having, like part of this teaching that Mercury and retrograde has been giving me, which is interesting, right? Because it's asking me to go back into history and look things through, which is the best way to really interact with a retrograde. Part of this teaching process has been, look at how this goes hand in hand with a lot of the other unconscious aspects of Western tradition, right? In Western tradition, we're consistently motivated to push forward, right? And that's where Mercury retrograde really causes things to fall apart, is right now we are in this very linear tradition, right? We since the Industrial Revolution, society has been all about like, hey, let's put out productivity, let's be consistent, let's make sure things are very consistent. We've lost touch with the cycles of agricultural society. And instead, what we've been trying to do is make sure things can feel permanent, right? And that's not how nature works. That's not how the seasons and cycles and signs work. That's not how life really works on an organic level, right? On an organic level, life has rhythms, it has cycles, it has a give and a take. Mercury retrograde is part of that take aspect, right? It's part of that, like, if we think about breath, like you breathe out, you have action, you act out, and then you breathe in. Mercury retrogrades is part of that breathing in cycle. It's it's like the return of a wave. And actually, Hermes and Mercury oftentimes get associated with oceans and that liminal boundary of the ocean and Earth. And so that's what throws us all for a loop, right? Is because we're trying to be stable. We have our 9 to 5, 7 days a week. We have all these things in our society that says you need to be this stable person. You need to have this stable linear progression. And then Mercury is here being like, no, we need to go backwards, right? We need to examine what's happened in the past. Is there anything else you need to clear away? What are what's deeply rooted in your unconscious that you need to be aware of? What is going on in the underworld? What is going on in the upper world? Listen to these messages, and you need to apply these, and you need to grow in these rhythms and in these cycles. And so when that Mercury retrograde hits and it's like, hey, look at everything inside, look at everything else in this picture, things start to fall apart, right? Because as a society, we're trained to not look at all that stuff and instead to clock in, clock out, do what we've been told, like what we've been told to do or we've determined to do, and march forward in this linear fashion. So this is a part of Western society that we can see actually manifesting itself in astrology and in the way that we work with astrology. And this really, to me, is tapping in a lot to that young Jungian idea that different cultures have different levels of the unconscious. They have different unconscious assumptions. And this is one of those unconscious assumptions, is that we've throughout history, especially since the Industrial Revolution, have consistently had our eyes on this prize of stability and routine. And we just we're supposed to be able to be at our best 100% of the time and in a very active, external, extroverted way, right? A way that causes production, a way that in our capitalist society, causes capital, right? Where we work, we reproduce, and we work to gather capital and thus stability. And in a way that is tangible, right? Whereas Mercury and Hermes, although they are definitely gods of commerce and they're definitely gods of transaction because it's that boundary, right? And crossing the boundaries, right? I give you some money, you give me some money, we exchange things, we exchange services, we exchange goods. There are whole other realms to them. They don't get addressed as much, right? When Jung was formulating his idea of the unconscious and of alchemy, of the unconscious and how alchemy relates to that and the symbol systems, he saw Hermes Mercury as the patron of the unconscious and the process of working with the unconscious, because he's a messenger that crosses between the conscious and unconscious realms. And you see that in alchemy too, where Mercury was often the patron of alchemists. And you also get to see this in Eastern tradition, right? So I'm going to switch over here real quick to something that is no longer open because I closed it. So give me a second to go and find that. And this is part of working with Mercury, is just like recognizing, hey, every once in a while, things really do fall apart, and that's okay. It's okay for things to like kind of go backwards a little bit. It's part of the experience. And you hear that, and like, for instance, you hear that in motivational speakers and you hear that amongst entrepreneurs, like, hey, every failure is a chance to really learn what success is all about, right? What is going to actually be successful? And you have to be able to have those, everything just failed, everything just fell apart, I just took 10 steps backwards, in order to really figure out what works, right? That's a growth mindset and learning mindset. And what that Mercury retrograde really gets to teach us is that growth mindset, right? Like, okay, all your communication systems just fell apart. What are you going to do about it? We can either freak out and be like, oh my gosh, like my life is ending, or we can figure out new ways to communicate. We can adapt, which is what Hermes is fantastic for, is adapting. So I'm going to come over here now and share into the Eastern tradition. So in the Eastern Taoist tradition, there's 5 elements, right? Western tradition has 4 elements. And each one of these elements is ruled by a planet. So let's start off with wood because it's spring or tree energy, and it's ruled by the Jupiter. And we are in the spring, so it's a lot of tree energy right now. Then you have fire ruled by Mars. You have earth ruled by Saturn. You have metal ruled by Venus. And then Hermes rules water, right? And water is definitely in the Eastern tradition related to consciousness, but it's related to a lot more features of consciousness than simply that which comes up for Virgo and Gemini, right? For Virgo and Gemini, it tends to be very practical with Virgo and very information and data driven with Gemini, right? In the East, it's a whole bunch of spaces, right? It's meditative states, it is dream states, it is fantasy states, and the other realms that you can create through writing and through theater and through nowadays cinema, right? It is the realm of mind, and it's the conscious and unconscious realms of mind. And Mercury rules over this and that water element. And you see this a lot more, I feel, with Taoism and with the East, because for a long period of time, Eastern tradition has worked on balancing the yin and yang, right? Taoism is where that concept of yin and yang comes from, that we're a lot more familiar with most of the time in the five elements. And so there's been this consistent aspect and this consistent mindfulness of balancing that extroversion and that introversion. Whereas in the West, even before the Industrial Revolution, we have expanding empires. We have a lot of yang energy that is just constantly pushing out, asking us to be more and more productive, asking us to conquer more and more space, asking us to fight our way higher and higher on the dominance scale, right? Obviously, China was an empire. It had a lot of this, but it also had features wherein it did observe a little bit of yin, right? So for instance, when the British came to China and were like, hey, let's trade. They've been conquering all throughout the world. And they came to China and they're like, we want to do some trading. And China, the emperor was like, why would we do that? And the Brits are like, well, because it's trading. It's good for everybody, right? We're the British. We've been doing this in India. We've been doing this all over the world. And what they had really been doing was conquering, colonizing, and being an empire, right? And the Chinese were like, we don't need that. Like, there's nothing you have that we want, right? If you're going to trade, we'll take some gold and silver. That's cool. But like, otherwise, go home. We don't need you, right? They were practicing that like yin energy of like, we can be still and just be here. We don't need to expand our trading network. We don't need to engage with you people. You have nothing to offer us. And the Brits ended up, they were like, okay, these people don't want anything from us, so we need to make them want something from us. And so they ended up exporting massive amounts of opium to China and getting the Chinese like population addicted to opium so that they would start to want something from the Brits so that the Brits could start to trade. And this caused the first and second opium wars. Draw what parallels you would like to the modern day and our addiction to opiates. And our addiction to opiates, which are oftentimes sold by corporations who need somebody to sell things to, right? We're now being colonized. And it worked for the Brits. That yang energy broke through. It devastated China. It devastated China in 2 different wars. It caused massive amounts of addiction and hurt tons and tons of people. But the Brits got what they wanted, right? They were able to yang force their ways through. And this kind of demonstrates how that Western energy and yang energy, and that fact that in the West we've sort of allowed ourselves to be blind a lot of the time to that rhythm and that drawback energy, allowed for them to colonize the rest of the world and allowed for us to traumatize a lot of the world, right? That not only the people that the West has colonized, but ourselves as we produce these societies that are constantly looking to be able to continuously push forward and push ourselves further and further, right? I mean, there's a reason why there's a reason why we have a opiate epidemic. There's a reason why we have a depression epidemic. There is a reason why stress and anxiety is so high in America. There is a reason why we have a lot of different health problems around stress, around anxiety, and around the fact that we consistently push ourselves to go further and further and further. And I think part of this really does get illustrated in this aspect of, hey, where's Mercury, right? Where is the full embodied Mercury? Where is that watery Mercury, right? In the Western tradition, we have an airy Mercury and we have an earthy Mercury, but where's the unconscious, and where is the unconscious getting its interaction, right? Where is the emotional realm? Mercury can do so much more than figure out our practical problems and arrange data in new ways, right? It can do so much more than collect data and put data out there. All obsessions of the West, right? We live in the information age. We're constantly gathering information. We're constantly putting information out there. We're not putting it to the best of use most of the time. But some of us really do like creating practical systems. And when that pays off, then you have then you get well paid, right? And yeah, you climb the social ladder. But that Mercury energy, it doesn't get balanced because in the traditional rulers, every planet has 3 signs that it does really well in, right? It has the 2 signs that it rules, and it has a 3rd sign that is exalted. The sun and moon are the exceptions to this because they're luminaries, and they really end up pretty much like they're 2 sides of that same coin of consciousness. You have the consciousness of the sun in that very external life, and then you have the unconscious realm of the moon in that very internalized life. Mercury should really be able to have an exaltation outside of its normal realms to deal with. It should be able to dive into the elements. And where I feel would be most necessary for Mercury is to be able to dive into the realm of water. And this is how you work with Mercury retrogrades. Mercury asks of us, requires of us, demands of us that we work with life in a cycle, that we're able to push forward and we're able to pull back, that we're able to exert ourselves into the future, create goals for the future, create ways of stepping forward, making plans, building that up when Mercury is direct, and then be able to step back into the past, to review our lives, to review what has been happening, to be mindful of our consciousness, to be mindful of our unconsciousness, right? Mercury demands this ability because Mercury really is the one who bridges all of those different spaces. And so this is really what a Mercury retrograde is all about, is it's slamming shut the doors around you and the distractions around you so that you can do that inner work. And as Jung points out in his own work with the unconscious, if we don't do our inner work, that inner work will get manifested in the world around us, right? Through synchronicities. And not only in this mystical way of synchronicities, but like if we don't do the work, for instance, of developing the ability to set healthy boundaries, we're going to find ourselves in relationships where we don't have healthy boundaries. And that creates its own level of very real challenges, right? I talk about this and it sounds very mystical, and in a way it is, but it's very, very practical. If we don't do the inner work of being able to state what our needs are, what our emotional and physical needs are, we're not going to be able to get our needs met in the way that we would if we were able to communicate them, right? And to be able to draw healthy boundaries, to be able to communicate our needs, requires oftentimes that we go through and we reprogram childhood messages, that we go through our memories and we figure out how have we been conditioned into such a way that we don't speak up for ourselves, that we don't draw healthy boundaries. In order to do this work, right, that allows us to actually create much more stability in the life around us and create a better flow in the life around us, we have to be able to do this inner work. And that's what Mercury retrogrades are all about. And that's why things fall apart when we haven't done that work, where we keep just trying to press forward and press forward and press forward, and we're not taking care of what has to happen in the realm inside. So one of the inspirations that came to me is really, if we want to work with an exaltation of Mercury outside of that kind of unconscious blind spot of the West, I think we should start working with Mercury and Scorpio, right? Because we need to find a way to work with Mercury and water signs. Cancer actually could also be a very good place for it. Subtly. Water signs where we're connecting with our emotions and we're connecting with the inner realms. The reason why I initially thought Scorpio is that a lot of that depth work that needs to happen, Scorpio is freaking fantastic for, right? Diving into the unconscious, figuring out what's going on in our shadow, diving in and doing hard, difficult work to bring up that muck, examine it, figure out how we have been conditioned and how we have conditioned ourselves into the lives that we create, right? Because we are creating these lives, but oftentimes we're creating these lives very unconsciously based off of previous conditioning. And Scorpio is fantastic in its ability to go in, figure that out, tear it apart, and allow for transformation. What came up to me a moment ago is Cancer is also really good at examining the past. But I'm going to stick with Scorpio as being the sign where this work would be really powerful, because Cancer is great at examining the past and having those memories and getting some intuitions, but it's not always the best in actually putting that into motion, right? Like, it can feel it out, it live in it, and it can experience it, but Scorpio actually has the push and the drive to push through it, right? So I am throwing it out there that I think we should start working with Mercury and Scorpio also, to create a new balance in our psyche, and especially in the Western psyche, right? Where we can allow ourselves to breathe, we can allow ourselves to observe the rhythms and the motions of time. We can allow ourselves to have times when we're extroverted and external, and have times when we're introverted and self-reflective. We can allow ourselves to recognize that maintaining the inner realm, the inner world, and doing that work, that inner work, is just as necessary as the world, as maintaining the external realm, right? And doing our external work. And when we do that, Mercury retrogrades aren't as difficult, right? Like, other than a few verbal slip-ups here, and having a little bit of some trepidation about really doing this video today, my Mercury retrograde's been great, right? Like, I've been inspired to pick up some old projects. I've been working on those. I had a client who said she was going to sign up for me like months ago and then vanished, just randomly book herself an appointment now, right? Like, people are like coming back from like the past, which is what Mercury is great for. Great time to call like old contacts. Great time to really reach out to some people you haven't talked to for a while. Great time to tie up loose ends, right? And when we're doing the inner work necessary, those things tend to just come around on their own, right? Because I've been doing my inner work, right? I am drawing healthy boundaries. Because I'm doing my inner work, I am confident. So I'm not overreaching to people, right? I'm letting them have their own space. So when they feel that they're ready, they come to me. Because I've been doing the inner work, like, I've created a lot of stability in my own life, which has made me available for other people. And that is 100% necessary to work with Mercury retrogrades, right? So that your life doesn't fall apart every time there's a Mercury retrograde because you've just been endlessly pushing forward, right? We need to have that give and take and that back and forth and that rhythm. So how do we do this, right? How do we do inner work? One of the basic things is going to be meditation, right? You can't create change unless you're mindful of actually what needs to be changed. So starting meditation practice, working a lot with that breath, that in and out flow, it's going to be super important. Part of this is going to be mindset, starting like trying to or working to get yourself into a growth mindset so that when things do take a step or two backwards, we don't see it as a failure. We see it as like, oh, okay, this is a new lesson, right? This is just a new lesson. I'm learning stuff from this, and I will adapt and figure out another way, right? And being grateful for that title, like out and in, back and forth. Being grateful for that title aspect, like that's something I've found has been popping up a lot for me the last few days. Is like I've been wanting to be a lot more quiet. I've been wanting to be a lot more still. And I've been just really thankful for like I've allowed myself to relax a little bit more lately, rest a little bit more, like play a little bit more. And rather than my business falling apart, actually it's just randomly popping up for me without me having to even apply myself. And I've just been really thankful for like, oh, cool. I get to read right now. Like, oh, great. I get to listen to some music right now. Like, oh, there's no one on my schedule for this day. Fantastic. The rest of my week has like I've got all the resources I need, right? Like everything's flowing well. And like I can just put this to use like doing some inner right or like some journaling or writing or some inner work, right? And just being thankful for that ease that has come from not pushing forward as much, right? And at other times and other rhythms and cycles, for instance, like Capricorn, I was pushing forward endlessly. And it was great because it was a time in the season to do that. And so working with those times and seasons, being thankful of those times and seasons, and then also other practical skills. Journaling is a great way to figure out what's going on inside. I like to do creative writing, wherein I just black out my screen and I let whatever characters need to come up, and I work with them as archetypes, right? Shamanic work and journeying is a fantastic way of getting into what's going on inside. Dream work is a fantastic way to get into what's going on inside. Hermes was the god of who delivered dreams, right? Hermes and Mercury were seen to deliver your dreams. I've been doing a ton of dream work lately, and it's been really, really great. And that's something I'm probably going to start. I want to work on it a good amount more, but eventually I will start working with people more in DreamWorks. I do a little bit of that with clients right now, but I'm going to probably start opening up a more education piece on that. But yeah, so dream work, journaling, journeying, active imagination is a great way of doing that. Therapy is a fantastic way of working with the inner realms. Being mindful of your body, being mindful of when your body gets triggered, when it gets anxious, when it gets emotionally aroused. All of these ways are ways of working with that internal world. And then when we start to get messages like, hey, I've been noticing maybe in my dreams or I've been noticing in my like journaling that I'm not setting healthy boundaries. We need to start doing the work to set healthy boundaries. Or I'm not asking for my needs to be met or even telling people what my needs are. We need to be able to start doing that work. Or I have this addiction that's draining energy. We need to be able to start working on that. And when we do this, and we do that inner work, and we make space, and we make room, and we're mindful of the tides and the rhythms, you won't have as many problems with Mercury retrograde, right? It'll be a powerful time for you rather than a time where everything falls apart, because the reason why it's falling apart is it's trying to get you to recognize that you need to be able to have that power internally, as well as all the power that we've been trying to express externally, right? So those are some thoughts and ideas about Mercury retrograde and the human psyche and how to work with it. If you have questions, please reach out to me. I'd love to chat more about it. And I do this sort of work with people all the time. Like, let's dive in, figure out what's going on inside and how we can work on that, how we can overcome addictions, how we can overcome anxiety, depression, stress, how we can work with the inner realms, right? Mercury is really strong in my chart, and I do a lot of work with him and a lot of work with people on these Mercury aspects. Even my chart readings for people in astrology, it's all about figuring out what's going on beneath so that we can work with it in a process of alchemy uh, through practical means and spiritual and psychological means. So please reach out because I love doing this and I love helping people with that. And enjoy your Mercury retrograde. And I hope that you find a way and a method that allows you to really tap into what this energy is all about and apply it in your life. Okay, great. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye.